Jimmy.
What's up, Ed? Nadine's first communion.
So what the hell are you doing here?
It's my daughter's car. It's my daughter's car.
You respect the donut shop that way. Hey, go get a
Val, ease up.
Agent, hey man.
She in there, Sean?
We're looking, Jimmy, okay? Right now, all she is missing, okay?
Yeah.
Is she in there? Is that my daughter in there? Son, is that my daughter in there? Oh, no! Oh, God! Oh, God!
I'm gonna find him before the police do. I'm gonna find him and I'm gonna kill him.
The film opens in Boston, where three young boys who are the best of friends, Jimmy, Sean, and Dave, are happily playing street hockey on a quiet neighborhood road. However, their game comes to a sudden halt when their ball accidentally rolls down a sewer opening in the curb, leaving them with no choice but to stop playing. Before long, Jimmy decides to pass the time by walking over to a patch of freshly poured wet cement nearby, using a stick to scratch his name into it. Sean quickly follows suit and writes his name too, but just as it becomes Dave's turn to leave his mark, a strange man abruptly approaches the trio and harshly reprimands them for destroying municipal property. The man flashes a badge and a pair of handcuffs, which immediately terrifies the boys into thinking he is a real police officer. He sternly demands to know their addresses. Upon hearing their answers, he notes that Jimmy and Sean live just around the corner, whereas Dave's house is quite a far distance away. Seizing this excuse, the man orders Dave to get into the back of his car, claiming he is going to drive him home to confront his mother about his stubborn behavior. Dave hesitates at first, feeling an instinctual wave of doubt, but the man aggressively pushes him into the back seat. Once inside, Dave looks up and sees a priest sitting in the front, staring back at him with an eerie smile. The car then speeds away, leaving Jimmy and Sean standing frozen in the middle of the street, forced to watch their friend disappear into the distance with a mixture of intense fear and confusion. A short while later, Jimmy and Sean spot their fathers and recount the strange encounter. This leaves the parents deeply puzzled, wondering why a police officer would go so far as to detain a child just for writing in wet cement. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to reveal a terrified Dave locked inside a dark basement, confirming the horrifying reality that he has indeed been kidnapped. As it turns out, the man was not a real police officer at all. He and the priest had taken Dave with the sole intention of harming him. Fortunately, after several agonizing days, Dave manages to break free from his captors and runs frantically through the woods to safety. He is eventually reunited with his family, but the horrific ordeal leaves him deeply traumatized, shattering his innocence and ensuring he will never be the same again. The story then fast forwards 25 years later, where Dave is now fully grown and seen picking up his young son from school. As they walk home, they pass by the very street where Dave used to play with his childhood friends. The sight of it triggers a painful wave of flashbacks, forcing him to relive the grim memories of the abuse he suffered. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Jimmy still lives in the same neighborhood, where he now owns and operates a small local supermarket. His eldest daughter, Katie, approaches him in the store to ask for permission to go out to a party later that evening. Jimmy agrees to let her go, but firmly warns her not to stay out too late because her younger sister's first Holy Communion is scheduled for the following morning. As soon as Katie gets into her car, her secret boyfriend, Brendan, surprises her by popping up from the back seat. Katie playfully warns him that if her father ever catches them together, he will literally kill him. The two then share a passionate kiss and agree to meet up the next day, just as they had planned. Not far away, we are introduced to Sean, who has grown up to become a dedicated homicide detective, working alongside his partner, a veteran cop named Whitey. Later that evening, Dave is sitting alone, drinking heavily at a local bar, when Katie unexpectedly walks in with a group of her vibrant friends. Dave immediately recognizes her as Jimmy's daughter, and he quietly watches the group from afar as they dance, laugh, and enjoy their night out. Sometime around 3 a.m., Dave finally stumbles home, but his hands are completely covered in blood, and he has a small, bleeding wound on his abdomen. His worried wife, Celeste, rushes to his side in a panic, desperately asking him what happened. Dave frantically explains that a man tried to mug him in an alleyway, forcing him to fight back in self-defense, which escalated into a violent brawl. As Celeste tenderly cleans his wounds, Dave vividly describes how he repeatedly slammed the mugger's head against the pavement, whispering in terror that he genuinely believes he killed the man. He breaks down in tears, prompting Celeste to wrap her arms around him, comforting him with the reassurance that he only did what was necessary to survive. The following morning, the police department receives an anonymous emergency call from a young boy. He nervously reports that he and his friend stumbled upon an abandoned car covered in blood. The boy quickly gives the authorities the location, but the moment the dispatcher asks for his name, he panics and abruptly hangs up the phone.
Me and my friend, we just found him.
Son, what's your name?
He wants to know her name.
Your name, son. What's your name?
We're so out of here. Good luck, man.
Before long, the police arrive at the designated crime scene. They locate the blood-splattered vehicle, but a thorough search of the immediate area yields no sign of a body. Elsewhere, Jimmy receives an anxious phone call from one of his employees, telling him that Katie never showed up for her morning shift. Growing uneasy, Jimmy walks up to Katie's bedroom to check on her, only to find the room completely empty and her bed untouched. A little later, while Jimmy is managing the supermarket, Brendan walks in with his younger brother, Ray Jr., who is mute. Noticing Katie's absence, Brendan asks Jimmy if he has seen her. Jimmy answers with clear irritation, sharply reminding Brendan that Katie is expected at her sister's first communion today and shouldn't be disturbed. Once the brothers leave the store, Jimmy's employee asks him why he harbors such an intense hatred for Brendan, but Jimmy avoids giving a clear or direct answer. Soon after, Sean and Whitey arrive at the scene of the abandoned car, where a registration check reveals that the vehicle belongs to Katie. A wave of dread washes over Sean as he realizes the missing girl is the daughter of his childhood friend, Jimmy. Meanwhile, over at the church, Jimmy attends his youngest daughter's first communion, but his anxiety skyrockets when Katie fails to show up for the family milestone. At the same time, Celeste sits at home, anxiously scanning the morning newspaper, her worry deepening when she finds absolutely no mention of a mugging or a dead body matching her husband's story. When the church service ends, Jimmy steps outside and notices a fleet of police cruisers rushing down the street with their sirens blaring. Driven by a bad feeling, he follows them to a blocked-off crime scene. Jimmy's heart drops when he pushes through the crowd and realizes that the forensic team is currently examining his daughter Katie's car.
It's my daughter's car.
Meanwhile, Sean follows a team of K9 units into a nearby wooded park as the tracking dogs seem to have caught a strong scent near a secluded area. Suddenly, Sean receives a radio call informing him that a distraught man has just arrived at the perimeter, claiming to be Katie's father. Jimmy has shown up with a group of local thugs who are beginning to clash violently with the police barrier. Sean instantly recognizes these men as the Savage Brothers, a notorious local criminal gang. Sean rushes over to intercept Jimmy, attempting to calm him down by assuring him that, as of right now, Katie is simply being treated as a missing person. However, the moment of hope is shattered when a forensic officer calls Sean over to a nearby clearing, stating they have just made a grim discovery. Back at home, Celeste's suspicions worsen when a breaking news report flashes on her television, detailing the discovery of a blood-soaked car and the high-profile disappearance of a young woman. She begins to harbor a sickening dread that her husband's violent encounter the previous night is directly tied to this tragedy. Deep in the park, Sean arrives at the designated location where he gazes down into an abandoned tool pit, only to find Katie's lifeless body. It is evident that the young woman was attacked before later being killed by 2 gunshots to the head. Suddenly, Jimmy breaks through the police line, charging toward the pit with his thugs, but a dozen officers immediately tackle and restrain him. Screaming at the top of his lungs, Jimmy demands to know if his daughter is dead.
Look at my eyes! Is she in there? Is that my daughter in there?
When Sean looks away in silent grief, unable to meet his eyes, Jimmy collapses to the ground, completely destroyed by sorrow. Later at the county morgue, a heartbroken Jimmy officially identifies his daughter's body. Accompanied by his grieving wife Annabeth, Jimmy sits down with Sean and Whitey to assist with the homicide investigation. During the conversation, they briefly touch upon the tragedy of Dave's childhood kidnapping. The dialogue reveals that Annabeth and Celeste are actually first cousins, meaning Jimmy and Dave are bound together as extended family. We also learn that Katie was Jimmy's daughter from his first marriage to a woman who had passed away many years ago. Sensing tension, Whitey abruptly shifts gears and asks Jimmy about his old criminal record involving an armed robbery. Jimmy flashes with anger, snapping that the incident happened a lifetime ago and has absolutely nothing to do with his daughter's murder. Later that afternoon, Sean and Whitey interview an elderly woman who lives on the perimeter of the park where the body was found. The old woman recalls hearing the distinct sound of a car crashing into a guardrail, followed shortly by the voice of a young woman greeting someone in a familiar tone, right before a loud bang echoed through the night. Piecing this timeline together, the detectives realize that the victim almost certainly knew her killer. Meanwhile, during the wake, Annabeth's elderly father, Theo, approaches Jimmy to offer his condolences. He tries to empathize, mentioning that he understands the pain of loss because his own wife passed away years ago. However, Theo goes on to advise Jimmy to put his grief aside for the sake of Annabeth and his surviving children, who still need a father. This unsolicited advice sends Jimmy into a quiet rage. He snaps back at Theo, stating that Theo has absolutely no idea what real agony feels like, because his wife died peacefully in her sleep, whereas Katie was mercilessly slaughtered. Next, the detectives track down two of Katie's closest friends for questioning. They are stunned to learn that Katie was secretly planning to elope to Las Vegas with Brendan that very weekend to start a new life. On the other side of town, Dave is startled when Jimmy unexpectedly shows up at his front door to pay a visit. Jimmy immediately notices a severe, freshly bandaged wound on Dave's hand. Dave quickly covers, nervously explaining that he jammed it in a heavy door while doing some household cleaning. The two old friends sit down to talk, and Jimmy breaks down in tears, explaining through his sobs how much Katie meant to him, and how her birth was the only thing that saved him from his own dark, criminal past. Following up on the elopement lead, Sean and Whitey pay a visit to Brendan, who falls into a state of total shock upon learning that his girlfriend has been murdered. Through his tears, Brendan admits that the last time he saw Katie was right before she went out to the bar, confirming their secret plan to run away together the following morning. He confesses that they were forced to keep their romance entirely under wraps because Jimmy harbored a fierce, unexplained hatred for Brendan's family.
What? That thief thinks he's better than our family? He's a thief! A scumbag burglar! Thought he'd probably have the same bad gene. You count yourself lucky, Brent.
As the interrogation continues, Brendan's mute brother, Ray Jr., walks into the house alongside his friend John, completely ignoring the tension to turn on the television. Before leaving, the detectives strongly urge a devastated Brendan to come down to the station to take a polygraph test to clear his name. That night, Jimmy walks into his kitchen and finds Celeste sitting alone in the dark. She gently offers to stay overnight to help comfort Annabeth, but Jimmy politely declines, assuring her she has done more than enough, prompting Celeste to gather her things and head home. Meanwhile, Dave sits at his son's bedside, telling him a bedtime story to help him sleep. However, the dark and metaphorical nature of the tale heavily mirrors the grim trauma of his own stolen childhood. Once their son is asleep, Celeste quietly confronts Dave about the lack of news coverage regarding his alleged alleyway mugger. Dave tries to brush it off calmly, suggesting that the injuries he inflicted probably weren't as severe as he initially thought, adding that a criminal would never risk going to a hospital anyway. Suddenly, Dave's demeanor shifts into something cold and detached as he abruptly changes the subject to Katie, noting that the only thing that truly matters now is that she is dead.
Anyhow, it doesn't matter, does it? I mean, Katie Markham is dead. That seems more important right now.
Celeste is deeply horrified by her husband's callous words, recoiling from him in absolute terror as a sickening realization begins to take hold. The next morning, Whitey informs Sean that Brendan passed his polygraph test with flying colors, effectively ruling him out as a primary suspect. They decide to pivot their investigation toward interviewing patrons who were at the bar on the night of the murder. While reviewing the guest list, Sean notices Dave's name and decides to pay him a visit. They catch up with Dave just as he is on his way to walk his son to school. When questioned about Katie, Dave openly admits that he saw her at the bar, recalling how happy she looked dancing with her friends. He adds that the girls left the establishment about 15 minutes before he did, cementing his departure time at roughly 1 a.m. Later, while taking a break, the two detectives compare notes. Whitey reveals he is deeply suspicious of Dave, pointing to the unexplained hand injury and the fact that he was one of the last people to see the victim alive. Sean, however, fiercely defends Dave, arguing that he has known him since they were boys, and insists that Dave simply doesn't have the capacity for such horrific violence. Meanwhile, Jimmy stands over Katie's body in the morgue as he prepares for her funeral arrangements. In a quiet, devastating moment alone with her, he makes a solemn vow that he will hunt down and kill her murderer before the police ever get the chance. The following afternoon, the detectives return to Jimmy's house to conduct a follow-up interview. They spot Dave on the porch, and Whitey immediately grills him about his hand injury again. This time, Dave alters his story, claiming he pinched it while taking out the trash. When the detectives step inside the house, they cross paths with Celeste, who appears visibly shaken, highly anxious, and in a desperate hurry to leave. Sensing her panic, Sean follows her outside as she hurriedly tries to walk away, stopping her to ask exactly what time Dave returned home on the night of Katie's murder. Celeste freezes, visibly trembling under the detective's gaze, but ultimately lies and claims she was fast asleep when her husband got back. A short while later, the detectives speak with Jimmy to break the news that Katie had been planning to run away to Las Vegas with Brendan. Jimmy flies into a rage, instantly accusing Brendan of being the killer. However, the detectives firmly disagree, noting that Brendan passed the lie detector test and loved Katie deeply. Sean presses Jimmy to explain the root of his intense hatred for Brendan. Jimmy finally relents, explaining that he used to be closely acquainted with Brendan's father, a man known on the streets as Just Ray. He reveals that Just Ray was a fellow criminal whom he deeply despised, particularly because Ray abandoned his pregnant wife right before their mute son, Ray Jr., was born. Because of this bad blood, Jimmy was convinced that Brendan and his brother were destined to become toxic criminals just like their father, which is why he fiercely opposed Katie's relationship. Upon returning to the precinct, the ballistics department drops a bombshell discovery. The gun and bullets used to execute Katie perfectly match a weapon used in a liquor store robbery exactly 18 years ago. Meanwhile, back at the house, Brendan sits in deep mourning when his mute brother, Ray Jr., enters the room to comfort him. Using sign language and broken words, Ray Jr. mentions that their mother believes it is for the best that Katie is gone, claiming Brendan can always find someone else. This sends Brendan into a furious rage, and he yells that he will never find a love like the one he shared with Katie. The next day, Sean and Whitey visit the liquor store tied to the 18-year-old cold case. The elderly owner confirms their suspicions, revealing that the perpetrator of that robbery was indeed Just Ray, who had briefly worked as an employee at the store. In another part of town, Celeste returns home late at night to find Dave waiting for her. When he demands to know where she has been, she admits she was sitting alone in her car, unable to stop thinking about the night Katie died. Dave looks at her coldly and asks if she honestly believes he is the monster who killed her, noting that she has been recoiling from his touch ever since that night. Celeste breaks down, confessing that she is utterly terrified and confused. She begs him to explain why he won't go to the police about his supposed mugger and why there isn't a single report about a violent assault anywhere in the city. This accusation finally snaps Dave's restraint. In a burst of raw, agonizing emotion, he finally opens up to his wife about the profound trauma of his childhood kidnapping, detailing how he suffered horrific abuse at the hands of the monsters who took him. Celeste is utterly stunned and heartbroken by the sheer weight of her husband's hidden trauma. Unable to cope with the heavy atmosphere, Dave walks out into the night to clear his head. With Just Ray's old gun now identified as the murder weapon, the investigation becomes increasingly tangled. Sean insists on re-interviewing Brendan, while Whitey remains hyper-focused on Dave, convinced that his childhood trauma has finally manifested into psychopathic behavior. Meanwhile, as Dave aimlessly wanders the neighborhood streets, he runs into Jimmy outside his house. Seizing the moment, Dave finally opens up, telling Jimmy that he saw Katie at the bar on her final night. With tears welling in his eyes, Dave describes how he briefly said hello to her, telling Jimmy how beautiful and radiantly happy his daughter looked, unaware that his words are inadvertently breaking Jimmy's heart even further. The following morning, Whitey pulls Sean aside with disturbing news. He reveals that he conducted an unauthorized, covert search of Dave's vehicle the previous night. Inside, he discovered traces of blood on the front seat and a significant amount of blood in the trunk, and the blood type in the trunk perfectly matches Katie's rare blood type. The detectives immediately bring Dave into the interrogation room, but he remains completely uncooperative, offering no helpful information. They discover that the blood type found in the front seat matches Dave's. As for the blood in the trunk, Dave wildly claims that his car was broken into the night before, suggesting that someone is actively trying to frame him for the murder. Meanwhile, Jimmy meets with his two trusted thugs whom he had tasked with running a parallel street investigation. However, the men report that they have come up completely empty because, surprisingly, the cops are actually doing their job and questioning every potential lead in the neighborhood. They also mention that they saw the police officially detain Dave and bring him into the station. This piece of information causes a switch to flip in Jimmy's mind, convincing him that his old friend must have something to do with the murder. Back at the precinct, Sean and Whitey dig deeper into Just Ray's criminal background. They discover that after his release for the liquor store robbery, he was arrested multiple times for various felonies, yet the charges were always mysteriously dropped. Seeking answers, they track down Just Ray's original arresting officer to find out how a career criminal kept escaping jail time. The officer reveals that Just Ray avoided prison because he became a high-level informant for the FBI. In exchange for his freedom, Ray ratted out Jimmy for a major heist, resulting in Jimmy serving a devastating 2-year prison sentence. Crucially, the officer adds that just 2 months before Jimmy was scheduled to be released from prison, Just Ray vanished off the face of the earth without a single trace.
What's that tell you?
Later that day, Jimmy returns home and finds a trembling Celeste waiting for him on the front porch. She tearfully announces that she has made the decision to take her son and leave Dave because she is absolutely terrified of what he has become. Celeste finally unburdens her conscience, revealing everything to Jimmy. How Dave returned home at 3 a.m. covered in blood, with a gouge in his stomach, and how he spun a wild tale about killing an anonymous mugger, a story they both believe is a blatant lie to cover up Katie's murder. Jimmy sits frozen, listening to the words in absolute disbelief. When he looks at Celeste and asks point blank if she truly believes Dave slaughtered his daughter, she bursts into tears and gives a heartbreaking, heavy-hearted yes. Simultaneously, the detectives bring Brendan back into the interrogation room for a grueling cross-examination. Brendan fiercely defends his father, insisting the man never owned a gun, and claims that even though he hasn't seen him in years, he knows his father is alive because a cash allowance is mailed to their family every month. Sean and Whitey finally drop the hammer, revealing to Brendan that the weapon used to execute Katie is the exact same gun his father used in the liquor store robbery nearly 2 decades ago. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Brendan remains stubbornly unconvinced, shouting that it's impossible. Realizing they cannot break the boy's resolve without a formal charge, the detectives are forced to let him go home. As Dave walks down a street, Jimmy's thugs casually approach him and invite him to grab a drink at a nearby dive bar. Dave tries to refuse, but eventually gives in to their persistence. Back at the station, Sean and Whitey listen to the original 911 recording of the anonymous tip over and over again. Suddenly, a chilling detail catches their attention. During the frantic call, one of the young boys accidentally refers to the victim as her, explicitly identifying the gender of the person tied to the vehicle. This sends a shockwave through the detectives. At the exact time that call was placed, the car was sitting abandoned on a deserted road, while Katie's body was hidden miles away in a park pit. The caller could only have known the victim was female if they had first-hand knowledge of what happened. Meanwhile, at the dive bar, the Savage brothers relentlessly ply Dave with shots of hard liquor, successfully getting him heavily intoxicated just as a grim-faced Jimmy walks through the door to join them. When Brendan finally arrives home, a dark suspicion drives him to tear away a loose ceiling tile where his father's old gun had been hidden away for years. His heart stops when he finds the leather holster completely empty. A moment later, Ray Jr. and his friend John stroll into the house, entirely unaware that a furious, trembling Brendan is waiting for them. Back at the bar, an incredibly drunk Dave realizes he is in over his head and tries to leave, but Jimmy and his thugs simply follow him outside, trailing after him as he heads out. Standing on the edge of the dark riverbank, Jimmy looks at Dave and coldly confesses that years ago, he murdered Just Ray on the exact spot where Dave is currently standing, before dumping his body into the depths of the river. Jimmy explains that he didn't kill Ray out of revenge for snitching to the feds. He killed him because Jimmy's first wife developed terminal cancer while he was locked up, cruelly depriving him of the chance to hold her hand during her final moments on Earth. Simultaneously, a furious Brendan confronts his brother Ray Jr., demanding to know who he hates. A terrified Ray frantically signs that he doesn't hate anyone. Brendan then asks him who he loves, to which Ray brokenly signs that he only loves his brother Brendan and no one else.
What about Mom? You love me so much. I want to hear you say it.
Meanwhile, Dave suddenly realizes with horror that Jimmy genuinely believes he is responsible for Katie's death. He fiercely denies the accusation, screaming his innocence, and frantically confesses the real truth about his bloody hands. That night, he stumbled upon a man harming a boy in a parked car, and in a fit of righteous, trauma-induced rage, he fatally attacked the man. Jimmy refuses to believe a single word of the story, mockingly asking why Dave hid the event from Celeste, pointing out the complete lack of any media reports regarding a dead body matching that description.
I don't remember hearing anything about any guy's body's been...
I put him in the trunk of my car.
Kim, Jimmy, do it! Kim, Jimmy, do it!
Shut up! Shut the f*** up! Everybody shut up! This is my daughter I'm talking about! Shut up! 19 years old. I didn't kill Katie. Look at me, Jimmy! I'm looking at you, Dave. I'm looking at you.
Dave falls to his knees, weeping and begging his old friend to believe him. In response, Jimmy draws a sharp pocket knife, coldly promising Dave that if he just confesses to Katie's murder, he will let him walk away with his life. Back at Brendan's house, the confrontation reaches a violent boiling point. Brendan pulls out the empty gun holster, demanding that Ray confess his love and tell the truth. Terrified, Ray panics and bolts for the door, prompting Brendan to relentlessly beat him. John tries to make a break for it as well, but Brendan tackles him to the ground, savagely raining blows down on his face. Blinded by grief and rage, Brendan screams at Ray, accusing him of murdering Katie, and looks poised to beat his own brother to death.
You love me so much you gotta kill my f***ing girlfriend, huh? Speak! You f***ing freak! Katie! Say it or you die!
As he continues choking him, John pulls out Just Ray's missing revolver and cocks it, pointing it directly at Brendan's head. Fortunately, the front door is kicked open as Sean and Whitey burst into the room, successfully tackling John and securing the firearm before another tragedy can unfold. Meanwhile, out by the dark river, Jimmy continues to ruthlessly pressure a weeping Dave into admitting to the murder, reiterating his false promise that a confession is his only ticket to surviving the night, even if it means spending the rest of his life behind bars. Desperate to survive and see his son again, a broken Dave finally gives up. He falsely confesses to the murder, weeping that he did it. When a disgusted Jimmy asks why, Dave softly explains that he looked at Katie's beautiful, unblemished youth and felt a consuming envy, because his own childhood was permanently destroyed the moment he was forced into the back of that fake police car 25 years ago.
A dream of youth. I don't remember having one. So it was a dream. You know what I mean. If you got that car instead of me.
Hearing the confession he wanted, Jimmy's face hardens. Breaking his promise, he plunges the pocket knife deep into Dave's chest, mercilessly stabbing his childhood friend multiple times before tossing the bloody blade into the dark waters. Jimmy then signals his thug, takes a firearm from his coat, and fires a final, fatal shot into Dave to finish him off. The following morning, Sean spots Jimmy sitting on the curb, drinking heavily. He pulls his car over and steps out to deliver breaking news that Katie's killers have been caught, identified as the young boys John and Ray Jr. Sean explains the tragic sequence of events. The boys had found Just Ray's hidden gun and took it out that night to play a prank, intending to carjack a random vehicle for a joyride. By horrific coincidence, the car they targeted belonged to Katie. John had only intended to scare her with the weapon, but his finger slipped and the gun accidentally discharged, shattering the car window. A terrified Katie used her car door to shove the boys away and bolted into the dark woods of the park. Terrified that Katie would identify them to the police and ruin their lives, the two boys hunted her through the trees like an animal. Once they trapped her in the pit, Ray Jr. brutally beat her with a heavy hockey stick, and John finished her off with 2 shots to the head. Jimmy freezes in absolute horror as the gravity of his mistake crashes down upon him. He realizes with sickening certainty that he has just brutally murdered a completely innocent man, his own childhood friend and family member. Sean then mentions that he is actively looking for Dave, explaining that forensics just uncovered the body of a severely beaten man hidden behind a local bar. The dead man was officially identified as a notorious, repeat offender with a dark criminal history. Sean looks at Jimmy intently and asks when was the last time he saw Dave. Jimmy looks blankly into space and replies that the last time he truly saw Dave was 25 years ago, looking out the back window of a car as it drove away. A heavy, suffocating silence falls between them. Sean asks Jimmy, confused about what he did, but Jimmy simply sighs and thanks him for finding his daughter's real killers, softly saying he wishes it had come just a little bit sooner. Gazing at his broken friend, Sean realizes with profound sadness that Jimmy has executed Dave. He quietly asks if Jimmy is now going to start sending a monthly cash allowance to Celeste and her son, just like he did for Just Ray's family. Jimmy offers no reply, staring silently ahead. In the final sequence, a numb Jimmy returns home and confesses to Annabeth that he murdered an innocent Dave and dumped his body into the river. Annabeth fiercely embraces her husband, holding him close as she whispers that he has absolutely nothing to feel guilty about, claiming that a man who loves his family as fiercely as Jimmy does can never be in the wrong. She coldly shifts the blame entirely onto Celeste, declaring that Celeste was a traitor who served her own husband up on a silver platter without ever bothering to learn the real story. The film shifts to a vibrant, crowded neighborhood parade. A shell-shocked, completely isolated Celeste stands in the crowd, spotting her young son marching in the procession. She desperately calls out his name, but the boy looks directly at her and coldly ignores her, deeply blaming his mother for the sudden, mysterious disappearance of his father. Across the street, Sean stands watching the parade when he catches Jimmy's eye from across the crowd. Sean raises his hand, forms his fingers into the shape of a gun, and fires a mock shot directly at Jimmy, a silent promise that he knows exactly what he did and will eventually bring him to justice. However, Jimmy merely adjusts his sunglasses, remaining completely calm, unbothered, and entirely remorseless as he fades back into the crowd. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more movies coming your way.